Hello, investigators, and welcome to Until the End of Time. My name is Veronica, and I am so excited today to get to share a card from the upcoming A Feast of Hemlock Vale player card expansion with you. And I know that in the past I have done all kinds of mysteries and riddles, but today I'm just going to show you, with of course a huge thanks to FFG for allowing me to preview this card. World, please meet the Ancestral token. The Ancestral token is a 3-cost 0 XP Guardian asset. It has a single willpower icon. It is Item, Charm, and Blessed. It has a reaction: after you defeat an enemy, exhaust the Ancestral token to add Blessed tokens to the Chaos bag equal to that enemy's printed health, maximum of 5. Flavor text reads: never forget those who came before. It takes 0 health and 2 sanity soak. It takes up the accessory slot in this card number 19, illustrated by Kate Swayze. That's the card. I think it is a really cool design. I think it is a really neat, straightforward design fitting into the Guardian style of I want to defeat enemies, but merging that with Guardian's need for blesses. We'll talk a lot more about the competition and how this card fits into the existing bless card pool, but safe to say I think this is the best bless generator Guardians has ever had. It's worth saying, because it's a 0 XP, you can put it in your deck right away and you can rely on this the entire campaign, but 3 resource cost is actually pretty on the expensive side, especially for something that doesn't help you kill enemies, right? That is, I think, the big hurdle with this card, is you need to spend 3 resources on something that doesn't do anything until you're able to kill enemies. And that is actually, I think, a very iconic Guardian thing, right? Guardians always need a bunch of assets set up before they're able to do their things. This is one of those cards, and I think that is the price you're going to have to pay to include this card, but I think it might be worth the price. It takes up a slot. We'll talk about the slot competition a bit more. I think the biggest thing with this card to me is it is a potentially uncapped amount of blessed tokens. Now, obviously, Arkham games don't go on forever. Eventually, the agenda is going to advance. But depending on how many enemies you can kill once per round, you can just keep adding blessed tokens. And I don't think it is weird to think that this will generate way more blessed tokens than even the 10 maximum. Like, assuming you're pulling them out, I think this could easily generate 20 blessed tokens over the course of a game. And the 2 horror soak's actually pretty nice in a class that can sometimes struggle with horror. So yeah, but just a little bonus. Talking about generating blesses in Guardian, I think the 2 cards that most easily compare to this are the Book of Psalms and the Blessed Blade, which are both 0 XP 3-cost Guardian assets, both of which have abilities that allow them to add blesses to the Chaos bag. However, neither of these have been truly fantastic. I actually think that the Book of Psalms is somewhat underrated. I think healing 4 horror does a lot more than you think it does, and adding 8 bless tokens is actually quite a lot. But I will also completely concede the fact that 5 actions, 1 to play this card and then 4 to use up all the secrets, is a lot. This card is slow in order to get the value out of it. And then the Blessed Blade, you can exhaust it to get a Bless token into the bag, and then if you reveal a Bless or Elder Sign, you get that +1 damage. That is just not reliable enough for a weapon, and so a lot of people haven't really tried the Blessed Blade, and those who have weren't very impressed by it. I think compared to these 2 cards, the Ancestral token is much better. It is narrower, right? It doesn't heal horror like the Book of Psalms does. It doesn't help you kill enemies like the Blessed Blade does. But instead of being multi-purpose, it is just, I am going to generate a lot of blessed tokens, and it does that way better than either of the other 2 cards. And so that brings us to the investigators most likely to use this card, and I think there are some pretty obvious picks here. Sister Mary is the Guardian from the Intimate Conspiracy cycle, and she is all about those blesses. I think that with her 3 combat, she's maybe a little bit less inclined to run this card, but I still don't think that a fighter Sister Mary is a bad deck. I've definitely seen some people, you put in those beat cops for the +1 combat, you bring a big lightning gun or flamethrower, and that more than compensates for your lower base stat, at which point you can generate a truly tremendous amount of blessed tokens. However, I think the investigator most likely to enjoy this card is the brand new Parallel Zoe Samaras, who has been altered to use blessed tokens as part of her ability. So when she deals damage to an enemy, she can add a blessed token once per phase. I've talked about her in a previous video, but I think the most important part of her new ability is that she can remove 3 blessed tokens from the Chaos bag to make an attack deal +1 damage. And so this becomes a kind of self-supporting loop. You remove the blessed tokens from the Chaos bag to deal more damage. That allows you to kill bigger enemies, and those allow you to exhaust the Ancestral token for more and more blessed tokens. I can definitely see me putting Ancestral token in a lot of parallel Zoe decks if I'm going to get around to playing her, because that just seems like a lot of free bonus damage. And I think it is important to realize that with this card out, any enemy just becomes free blessed tokens. Even something as minor as a ghoul minion, which is just a 2/2/2 enemy I think we've all seen before, just becomes 2 free blessed tokens, right? And where with the Book of Psalms, where if you wanted to get those 2 free blessed tokens, you had to spend an action and one of the uses. Ancestral token, it has to exhaust, so you can only do it once per turn, but otherwise, you don't have to spend more actions or limited uses once this card's in play. Every enemy you draw potentially adds more blesses to the bag. And it can add up quite quickly, because an enemy like a Hunting Nightgaunt with 4 health is not a rarity in a lot of campaigns, right? Not every campaign has as many enemies with higher health values, but it's not uncommon to see enemies with 4 health, especially towards the latter end of the campaign, at which point you just get a free keep fate whenever you kill those things. And if you're the Guardian, that's probably what you want to do. And I think a lot of people would agree with me that a big reason why Survivor has been considered the better Blast faction than Guardian is just that they've been struggling to get Blast generation going, right? They don't generate the blesses needed for their cool effects. And so getting these on tap whenever you need them for no additional investment once you've got this card down, that is just so powerful. And I think it really changes the paradigm under which Guardian Blast has been operating so far. Because what can you do with these blessed tokens once they're in the bag? And keep in mind, all the cards I'm about to show you, they're all from the Instant Conspiracy, because we haven't seen a lot of blessed cards from the Hemlock Vale expansion yet. I'm assuming there's going to be a bunch more cool payoffs in there too, but we'll have to see. You know, I can't time travel. So Rite of Sanctification is, I think, an insane card, and the only reason it's not like in every deck is because blessed generation is sometimes a little tricky. But this lets you put 5 blessed tokens on it. And then whenever anyone at your location plays a card, you exhaust this, you release one of the blesses, you don't even have to return it to supply. It goes back into the bag. So its only cost is that it had to be on this card for a little bit, and you reduce the cost of the card that's getting played by 2. This is a 0 XP, 0 cost, gain 10 resources over the course of 5 turns. This is so much economy, which is something that Guardian desperately needs. And is one of the biggest hits against cards like Ancestral Token is you're spending money on cards that are not helping you fight the enemies. Well, guess what? If you can get a couple of blesses in the bag, play a Rite of Sanctification, you can now play your weapons, you can play your expensive allies, you can play all your other support cards because you have all this money. And I think this is such a big deal. If you want to be more traditional and just hit things really hard, Radiant Smite, you can seal up to 3 blessed tokens, and for every blessed token you seal for this attack, you get +1 skill value, +1 damage. This is a 1 XP, 1 cost, 4 damage attack. This card is really strong. And the only cost really is those blessed tokens. And so I think that Guardian really has had the powerful blast payoffs, but they've been lacking in a way to generate those blesses, and Central Token comes here to save the day. Of course, you want to make sure those blessed tokens don't get wasted, so Sacred Covenant, which is the Guardian Covenant, allows you to return the blessed tokens to the bag instead of spending them, but you lose out on the modifier. Or you can go with the Nephthys, which is another way of turning blesses into damage, because every time blesses would be removed from the Chaos bag during a skill test, you seal them on Nephthys instead, and then you can exhaust her to either put those blesses back into the bag, or you remove 3 of them for 2/3 damage. If that damage kills an enemy, guess what? You can exhaust the Ancestral Token, you can get some blesses back. I think this is a very potent archetype that has been a little bit tricky to pull off, and I think Ancestral Token might just have been exactly what it needed. Then we get to, obviously, the challenges with putting this into play. Fortunately, it is an item, and as such, you can backpack for it. You can use Schaffner's Catalog, which either you or a teammate plays, to pay for it. You can use the Gear the Up permanent from the Edge of the Earth to put it into play cheaply at the start of the game, or you can Ever Vigilant for it, right? Guardian does have a couple of cards that interact with their playstyle that makes playing this a little bit easier, and I think it is going to work if you try for it. I totally agree with anybody saying that, you know, a 3-cost asset that doesn't really do anything unless you're already able to kill enemies, that is a tricky sell. But I think the payoff here is potentially very big. There is, of course, also the slot issue. Hallowed Mirror is a very powerful card, and I think that giving up the Hallowed Mirror for the Ancestral Token is a tough sell, and you don't really want to play both, because they kind of both have to stay in play. It's not like you can play the Ancestral Token, leave it on the table for a little bit, and then play the Mirror when you need that healing. I mean, you could do that, but it's tricky. And there is also the level 2 Holy Rosary, which is another Bless generating card. Although I'm gonna go ahead and say that I think Ancestral Token, if you're just looking for that Bless generation, is just better. If you want that +1 willpower, I can definitely see the Holy Rosary coming in clutch. But the thing is that unless you're playing like the Circle Undone, you're not succeeding at that many willpower tests, and definitely not every round, at which point only 2 blesses per time you activate this. Ancestral Token can do better than that. And if you're worried about the slot, well, we do have Relic Hunter, and of course there is the new Occult Reliquary, which was previewed earlier, I think last month, which is a limit once per deck permanent for 3 XP that lets you get an additional hand, accessory, or arcane slot, which can be used to hold a blessed or cursed asset, right? So you can make this work, I think, and in that case, it's actually kind of nice. You could potentially use this to hold an arcane or hand slot for something else until the point where you need to play your second accessory, at which point you can maybe shift your slots around. Maybe you don't need that extra hand slot anymore, you found a bandolier. I think that's a very neat way to make this card work. And of course, we need to get enemies. I think this is a tricky bit, especially if you're playing lower player count, because not every turn is going to have enemies, but there are cards that make that work. On the Hunt has historically not seen the most play, but I still think it's a reasonable card to include. It lets you basically skip drawing an encounter card, and in exchange you just get an enemy. And of course there is the Kicking the Hornet's Nest from the Scarlet Keys expansion, which as an action, you go find an enemy, spawn it, you get a clue and some resources. And this actually rewards you for picking a bigger enemy because it gives you more resources, which then also would give you more Bless tokens with the Ancestral Token. So yeah, that's the Ancestral Token. Once again, huge thanks to FFG for allowing me to preview this card. I think it's a really neat card. I don't think it's like overpowered or anything, which is very nice. I love looking at this card and going, yeah, I can see reasons to play this card. I can also definitely see reasons that you don't want to include this card because you need the slot for something else, the resources too many, or maybe you're not just not expecting to deal with that many enemies and the blesses you're able to get those another way. But I think that if you lean into this card, it is definitely going to pay off and it's going to give you a lot of value. So thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you until the end of time. Bye! Hey, Xander! I just wanted to reach out and let you know that the preview went very well. They all love the Ancestral Token.
Hey, Veronica, that's awesome. What about the other card? What'd they think?
What other card?
The other card we sent you? I think it was card number 54, something like that?
Oh, I have made a terrible mistake. I have to go right now. Talk to you later. Bye! Whoops. So it turns out I had another card to preview. And as Xander pointed out, that is card number 54. This is Fine Tuning. It is a 2-cost, 1 XP Seeker event with Intellect and Agility icons. It is Insight and Upgrade traded. It attaches to a tool or science asset you control, limit 1 per asset, and it has a very simple reaction ability. After attached asset exhausts, you exhaust the Fine Tuning to ready the attached asset. Flavor text: I assure you, there's nothing to fear. And is illustrated by Billy Norby. I think this is actually a very straightforward card. As far as cards are concerned, 1 XP means it's accessible to off-class seekers as well. It's worth noting that it isn't fast, so you're going to have to spend an action to play this. And it also does nothing if you don't have a tool or science asset you control, right? Worth remembering that these kind of upgrade cards, you need the base card, otherwise your deck is not working very well. But then what it basically lets you do is exhaust the same card or twice a turn, right? It just gives your your limited exhaust cards an extra use every turn. So what are we going to use this on? Classic tools like Flashlight, or some of the newer, cooler science cards like the Scarlet Keys Alchemical Distillation? No, because these cards don't exhaust. Well, what about Fingerprint Kit or Cryptographic Cipher? These are both tools, and they do both exhaust, but again, I don't think these are the cards that we want to attach our fine-tuning to. And the reason is very simple: they both have very limited uses, and their use is restricted far more in their uses than it is in their actually exhausting. I should note, you can dump a whole bunch of supplies on Fingerprint Kit, and at that point this card maybe becomes a little bit more appealing. But really, I think when we're looking at fine-tuning, we should be looking at tool or science assets that primarily get restricted by their exhaustion, and what better card to exemplify this than lockpicks. Lockpicks has been a rogue staple ever since it got released in Carcosa. In fact, it's so much of a staple that it got added to the revised core set so that rogues never have to go without them. Because what it lets you do is you exhaust the lockpicks to add your agility value to your intellect for an investigation. If you don't succeed by 2 or more, you remove a supply from lockpicks. So basically, while this card does have uses, those uses don't get used up every time you activate it. Hopefully, don't try to avoid drawing the autofill on that one. Just pro gamer tip there. Basically, lockpicks are limited by the number of times you can exhaust them, and it has made rogues into a class that can very easily get like 1 clue a turn, but sometimes struggle to get multiple clues a turn. You don't really want to play multiple lockpicks because that's taking up all your hand slots. Well, here's an excellent way to get an extra use out of your lockpicks every single turn, pick up 2 clues, which especially if you're playing that rogue game with lots of extra action, can be very powerful. Then there's the Pocket Multi-Tool. This is a customizable card, so there's a whole bunch of text that you can add to this card that's not on screen right now. But the basic thing is that you can spend XP to increase the skill value boost on specific tests. So get +2 on Investigates or +2 on Fights, stuff like that. I think that getting an extra use out of your Pocket Multi-Tool can be quite powerful. I know that there's a use on there, like an upgrade that lets you ready it whenever you fail a test. What if you didn't have to fail a test? What if you could just pass all of your tests? I think Pocket Multi-Tool could be a very nice fine-tuning target just to have a lot of flexibility in how you get those skill boosts. But then I think one thing that really stands out to me is that Tool and Science are really the traits for the upcoming expansion, right? Hemlock Vale is all about those tools and all about that science, as shown by cards like Chemistry Set and Microscope. So Chemistry Set is pretty straightforward. You exhaust it to investigate, and if you succeed by a certain amount, you get a benefit, whether that be extra resources, you get to draw cards, or even discover extra clues at your location. The tricky bit is you have to succeed by exactly that amount, which requires a little bit of finagling. Fine-tuning gives you an extra chance to hit that effect that you want to get, which is very nice. And then there's the Microscope, which is a very curious combo with this card, because it's worth saying that the investigate ability on this, which is a double action investigate, and then you can spend extra evidence to get extra clues, that doesn't require you to exhaust. When you exhaust this card is when someone at your location successfully evades or defeats an enemy to put a evidence on this card. With fine tuning, you could potentially add 2 evidence on this card every single turn, which might sound like a bit of a stretch, especially in lower player counts, but I think that there are a lot of rogue decks that like to evade enemies and then fight them, right? Like the dirty fighting style, or maybe you're even doing this in Kamani somehow, you have to get the fine-tuning from somebody else with like, you owe me one or something, but basically the idea being that Microscope, I think, is balanced very much by the idea that you're only getting 1 evidence per turn, and then you can spend that evidence to get 3 clues for 2 actions, which is pretty nice. I think that once you start fine-tuning this card, you can potentially get all those uses every single turn. You get lots of clues very quickly. And speaking of getting lots of clues very quickly, I think there is no card that better works with this right now on the top of my head than Mariner's Compass. So this is part of the Dark Horse style of cards where you have to have no research in your resource pool to get a benefit. And in this case, that benefit is you get an extra clue when you exhaust this and investigate with it. The tricky bit is you only use it once per turn. And now with fine-tuning, you can use it twice a turn. And I can definitely see a Min deck, the investigator from the Carcosa cycle, who can use Mariner's Compass multiple times a turn because Min is all about those skill cards, getting extra icons on the skill card, so she has no problem not having resources, and the fact that Mariner's Compass doesn't really give you a boost, that's not going to be a problem for her, at which point you are just picking up so many clues with this ability. I really like this. I really think this is going to be a powerful deck going forward. And speaking of investigators, there's of course Wilson. Wilson the Handyman was previewed by Los Archivos de Arkham, and he can take improvised and or upgrade cards level 0 to 1. I noticed that almost right away when they previewed him, because of course I knew this card was coming, and yeah, I don't quite know what Wilson decks are going to look like yet. I haven't had a lot of time to think about him, and so far there's a lot of weapon tools that I'm looking at which don't necessarily exhaust. But if you're doing any kind of tool thing, you can do it in Wilson because he can take cool tool cards 0 to 5. So surely there will be decks with Wilson in them that will want this fine-tuning card. I think this is an excellent use of that improvised and upgrade cards 0 to 1. And then there's Kate Withrop. I don't know what Kate's deck building is going to be yet. I don't think that's been revealed, and if I'm honest, I don't believe it's going to get revealed before the end of preview season. because she was in the original article, but Kate also really cares about science and tool cards, so I can't really imagine her not being able to take this card, at which point, yeah, you can do some of those chemistry set or microscope tricks I was talking about in her. In conclusion, I think Fine Tuning is a very interesting little upgrade card. It's curious, and I think it requires a certain kind of deck that you really have to build around. The fact that it's inside traded means it's maybe a little hard to find, but I think you can make that work. And once you do, I think this card can potentially break a lot of the limitations on these cards that are balanced around the fact that they have to exhaust by letting you exhaust them twice a turn. So yeah, those are my preview cards. Thank you for watching. I promise you I don't have another secret third card. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you until the end of time.